Welcome back to the California Conversation. I'm Tess Abraham. Ahead of our nation's 250th birthday celebration, American patriotism is at an all-time low. A recent poll showed that just 33% of Americans say that they are extremely proud to be American. And that is a stunning decline from the nearly 70% who said the same in months following the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks. The sad truth is that California is ground zero for this crisis because only 12% of Democrats, the party that dominates our state well ahead of any other party, said that they are proud to be Americans, which is very unlike Republicans, in which 62% of them said that they are extremely proud. But this 4th of July, we have a choice. We can keep going down this path that says that we have to apologize for our country and that we can never be proud of everything that we have built here. Or we can reclaim what makes America so great. We can redefine what true patriotism is, and we can make a better country and a better state for ourselves and for the next generation. So today we're talking about just that. We're talking about why patriotism has declined, what true patriotism really looks like, and how we can restore it even here in California. But before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you stay up to date on all things California politics. And this show wouldn't be possible without our amazing brand partners, including Every Life. Now, this 4th of July, one of the best ways to support our country is by supporting companies that reflect your values, the values that our country was built upon, which are family and faith. Every Life is the first and only pro-life diaper company in America. They make premium products for both baby and for mom, and their diapers are made with completely clean and safe ingredients that you can feel good about using. But even beyond just creating diapers, they do a few other things too. For one, they have a great non-toxic female hygiene brand, and so I use that product line. I can attest it is wonderful. Every woman should be able to switch over and know that they are using non-toxic products for their bodies. But on top of that, they also donate millions of dollars to pregnancy centers around the United States, helping real women and real babies in need. So check them out today. Use my code TESSA10 or shop through my link below in order to get 10% off your first order. And so you can support a company that shares your values, you can support a company that loves your country, and you can support the show all at the same time. So why is patriotism declining? Let's start with the data. So in 2025, polls conducted showed that patriotism was at the lowest that it had ever been. And it wasn't just a slight dip, it was actually historic lows. And now that we're seeing, and the polls that I cited at the top of the show, that it's only gotten worse. In 2026, only 33% of Americans say that they are extremely proud to be American. And only a handful, another 20%, say that they are proud at all to be an American. But what's more disturbing, as I alluded to, is not just that there's a decline in patriotism, but the radical partisan split that is happening between parties, because we are seeing in polling that Democrats are overwhelmingly not proud of their country. And what's so concerning for us is that we live in California, which is a state with a Democrat stronghold and supermajority. And so if the Democrat Party is not patriotic, and if California is overwhelmingly Democrat, then California has a major patriotism problem on its hands. And that matters for people like you and me who love our country, who love our state, and who want to continue pushing forward her values. But here's the thing, the numbers are just a symptom. So the polling doesn't actually tell us why patriotism is declining, and it is not the sole problem. The problem isn't that Americans are less patriotic. There's something underlying it. There are root causes behind why patriotism is declining. And so it's similar to anything, right? Anything medical. If your stomach hurts, the stomach pain is not the problem. You could take a pain reliever in order to reduce the pain, but that wouldn't actually get to the root cause, and it could make things worse if it's going to just mask the symptoms that are alerting your body that something is wrong. No, you want to get to the source of the problem. And so we need to get to the source of the problem with patriotism in our country and in our state. If we want to stop the bleeding, we have to find the wound. We have to understand what is going on. So there are several different rabbit holes we could go down. There are probably several causes that all lend itself into this. But what we are going to do is we're going to just start pulling on the thread, and we're going to see where it leads us. The first thread to unravel really is what we have been teaching in education with regard to American identity. So a big problem is the education around American history, as well as what our country stands for. And so it all is under this umbrella of American civics education. So in March, Cal Matters put out a piece that talked about how California civics teachers were handling America's 250th birthday. And you might pause and think, what do you mean? How are they handling it? What is there to handle? It's amazing that our country has made it this far and we should celebrate that. But that is not at all as straightforward as you might think that it is, because the piece literally put in its title that California teachers are treading lightly on the subject. And so it talks about how teachers are caught between competing narratives about our country. It says that they are often afraid to say the wrong thing and that they don't want to be too celebratory about our country, which is so absurd. How you could be too celebratory about our nation reaching a major milestone is absolutely ridiculous, but is completely indicative of what is being taught to our children in schools and how the next generation is being raised and has been raised over the past few generations to believe about our country. There has been a massive curriculum shift to no longer focus on truly how remarkable our founding was, even if imperfect, still remarkable that we were able to found our nation, that we were able to set up the system of government that we have in place today. We're shifting away from that, and instead we're only focusing on all of the failures of our country. We're blaming all of the problems that we see today on our nation's founding and on the very structure. We're saying that America as a country on the whole is racist and that it is the root cause of all sorts of evil. And so that's where the shift has gone, rather than showing what an amazing form of government we truly have here and why we're blessed to have it. The American Enterprise Institute puts it as, quote, students learn to see themselves as outsiders to a civic tradition that they were never taught to claim. And so that's a very good way. That's a way to put a pin on exactly what is happening here, is there's no ownership being given to the next generation about America and about defending her or preserving her. Instead, students are being taught to look at America and to look at our founding from an outside view, to critique and criticize it from that view, which then lends to not really caring about protecting it because it's not something that you ever really inherited. It's not your heritage. It's not your history. When instead, we should be teaching them it is their history, it is their heritage, and it is theirs to carry the torch on. Alexis de Tocqueville, who was a French writer who came to America in the 1830s, he wrote a great piece, the most perspective account about what actually made our country work. And what he said is that internal disengagement is the greatest threat to our country, more than any sort of foreign enemy or any other threat could actually pose. And so he wrote that Americans' genius is our habit of forming civic associations for everything and showing up for them. And that's because America was founded to govern itself. That means that the people show up, the people are engaged, the people are involved in their very leadership. And so this habit is what he calls the secret of American strength, which then means that if internally we disengage, it means that if we no longer see ourselves as part of this association, as part of needing to show up in the process, that means it would destroy America. If that really is the secret to how our government functions, then it requires the participation, the active participation of the people who live in the country. But again, we have moved to more of a model of critiquing and observing and standing back to criticize and point out the failures of our country, rather than to say, this is my country. I have ownership in her. I love her and I want to make her better. And so what happens when we stop teaching people, when we stop teaching students why they should even care about engaging in American society? Because if you just say that it's all terrible, then nobody cares. They just want to burn it down. They don't care if it continues on. They're not going to engage. And so that's what de Tocqueville was saying is our actual greatest threat. But education is just the beginning of the thread that we're pulling, because while education is a big problem, there's actually a deeper issue. We see in that education that it fundamentally misunderstands America. It misunderstands why we should engage. It misunderstands what patriotism even is. And so instead, it teaches our children that America is evil. It wasn't always perfect. Therefore, you can't be proud of it. But that, again, is to misunderstand what it means to be patriotic and what it means to be American. So we have to answer the question, what does it mean to be patriotic? What is true patriotism? And what is patriotism not? And that word really is so loaded these days. It's so weaponized politically. The idea of patriotism is often misunderstood or it is not presented accurately. And so we need to go back. We need to go back to our very founding and we need to see what their understanding of patriotism was in order to get an accurate view of how we should view our country, not through the lenses of our culture today, but through the lenses of our very founding 250 years ago. So let's start with our very Declaration of Independence. It opens with the most famous lines that are not just poetry, but are our entire political philosophy of our government. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so from the very beginning, our founding documents, our very declaration of our independence from Britain, show that the government exists to protect rights that exist independent of it. And so you and I have certain fundamental rights as human beings created by God that the government does not give us and therefore cannot take from us. Government is supposed to protect those rights. It's supposed to acknowledge those rights, and then it is supposed to get out of the way and leave the people to govern themselves and to live their lives. And so Thomas Jefferson, in his inaugural address, said, quote, "A wise and frugal government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of a labor the bread that it has earned. This is the sum of good government." And so from the very beginning, our founders set the basis for what our country was going to be and what it was going to be built upon. It was not going to be a government that was ruled by the divine right of kings or was going to have some caste system like we've seen in other countries. No, it was going to be a government for and by the people. And then it was going to step back and get out of the way because inherently it was limited. It had very specific purposes that it was going to achieve. And those purposes were rooted in the fact that every single person is a human being with inherent dignity, which means that they should be governed, they should be ruled with dignity, with morality, and ultimately with liberty. But patriotism doesn't stop there. James Madison spoke of it by saying, quote, "You will never know how much it has cost my generation to preserve your freedom. I hope that you will make good use of it." So we also see in the founders' writings that there was a sense of gratitude and personal obligation for the sacrifices that had been made in order to set up our entire system of government. It's the recognition that says you are inheriting something. Even people in their day were inheriting something that was purchased for them at a great cost, a cost that they would not have to pay, and a cost that you and I today most likely not all have to be paying. And so because of that, there's a responsibility, there's a personal obligation to protect what has been given to us and to pass it on. And so it all ties in to that ownership perspective that America is yours and mine. And it also belongs to our children. And so we must preserve her, we must defend her, and then we must pass her as an inheritance to the next generation. And on that note, Samuel Adams, who was the firebrand of Boston, he was a man who more than almost anyone lit the fuse of the very revolution. He wrote in 1776, after signing the Declaration of Independence, quote, "If ye love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude than the animated contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We ask not your counsel or arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains sit lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you were our countrymen." That is incredibly harsh, but it was designed to be harsh because he was speaking specifically to those who were in apathy, those who did not want to have to do anything to fight for the freedoms that they had just been given. And so he says, if you do not love your liberty enough to fight for it, then inevitably you are going to lose it. And so then you do not deserve it. If you don't want to fight for it, you don't need to be here. So Patriotism, according to our founding fathers, is threefold. It is one, a recognition of the unique and blessed circumstances that we have here because of our form of government. Two, a sense of personal gratitude for what it cost so many who came before us to create this framework of government under which we have liberty. And three, a duty to actively preserve and protect the freedom that we have been given because we love it and we love the country that has made it possible to be free. But our current culture does not have any of this. It does not recognize that we are unique and that it is wonderful to live in the United States. They do not have a sense of personal gratitude for anything. And we absolutely do not have a duty to actively preserve and protect our country. Instead, we hear from our culture that all of that is problematic, that is some sort of cultural arrogance to say that you are above other countries, that it's naive to say that America is great because America has committed great sins. It is violent to say that we have a supreme form of government or that we have a great culture that we want to be spreading throughout the world, that instead that's violent or again, that's arrogant. And so a thoughtful and educated person who goes to Harvard or goes to our institutions today would look at America with suspicion and look at it with shame. That pride in our country is for children, that it's something that you grow out of the older that you get. And so what I see as we're continuing to pull that thread, it's not just education and it's not just a lack of understanding, but it's also a social pressure that says that if you love your country, that you will be called racist or you'll be called naive or ignorant or stupid. And so this drift in patriotism is really due to societal pressure because of the misunderstanding of what our country really is. And I have to caveat, I think I made this clear in my definition of patriotism, but we are not talking about blind nationalism. We're not saying that our country is and has always been perfect. It's a fallacy to say that you can only love America because she is perfect. You absolutely do not have to. And so we are not saying by any metric that America has always made the correct decision, that every leader has been fantastic, and that we haven't sometimes gotten things wrong. But we can look to examples to show us that, again, you don't have to believe any of those things in order to still love, believe in, and fight for America. And so one of our greatest examples is actually a man who had every single reason to turn against America, to turn against our country, and yet who didn't. And that would be Frederick Douglass, because Frederick Douglass was a slave. He saw the absolute worst that America had to offer. He lived in it. He had personal experience and intimate knowledge of the horrors that could be done in our country by denying him his basic human rights, by denying the fact that he was fully human and deserving of the same rights as someone next to him of a different race. But in 1852, he put out what to the slave is the 4th of July. And it was a ferocious indictment of American hypocrisy to say that we should celebrate America being free while not every American is actually free or is recognized as an American. But what's interesting is that in that, he would have all of the basis, more basis than anyone existing today, to actually say, destroy America, tear her down. But he doesn't do that. While indicting America's leadership, while indicting her form of government for not protecting the slave, he still, instead of calling for her destruction, calls for her to live up to her founding promises, to the principles that are in our Constitution. He even calls the Constitution a, quote, glorious liberty document, because he says that in it contained the framework for justice, for freedom, and that the people just needed to have the will to actually live up to that, to actually demand that those principles would be carried out in a way that is consistent and not in a way that's inconsistent. So he did not say that we shouldn't have pride in our country. He did not say that we should just walk away from America and it's all corrupt and racist. He said that America at its very founding had all of the pieces that it needed to truly offer freedom and liberty and justice, and that the people were just not living up to that. And so listen to his words. He says, quote, "Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country." That is the type of patriotism that I am talking about. A patriotism that is not blind to the blights and the sins and the transgressions of our country. It is not just closing its eyes. He certainly did not do that. He lived in it. And he says, notwithstanding the dark picture, he was very aware of it. He lived inside of it, but instead demonstrating faith in the framework to say that the framework of America is freedom. The framework of America is justice. And so instead of giving up on our country, we must be committed to the ongoing work of being worthy of her founding principles. And if he could commit to that as a person who was literally a slave, then you and I and every person who lives in America today should certainly commit to continuing that ongoing work. The founders built something remarkable. They never claimed it was going to be perfect because no country and no person ever in history has been perfect, but they expected us to build upon it, to improve it, to continue pushing forward the very principles that were within its founding. What they would have railed against is an entire generation or an entire society and culture who says the whole project is not worth defending, that the whole thing needs to be abolished, that we shouldn't have pride in our country anymore, that we're just done with it. That's exactly what Samuel Adams railed against. That's what he was saying, is that type of disengagement, that type of apathy is absolutely going to destroy our country, and that you should not be here if you do not believe in continuing to build on the work that they started. And so our current culture's attitude toward this country, the decline in the patriotism, the constant critiquing of America without celebrating all that makes her unique and amazing and blessed, is truly not worthy of our founders. It is not worthy of their labor, of their dedication, of their sacrifice, and of their pure genius in creating this form of government for us 250 years ago. But I don't want to only sit in the negative because it's the 4th of July. So we need to ask, how do we get it back? How do we rebuild what we once had in that day? How do we do so in a state like California where it feels overwhelming and difficult and where we would be tempted to despair? Self-governance is a skill. It's something that has to be practiced. It requires time. It requires repetitions. So here are 3 very practical things that you and I can do today. The first is schools. We talked about educations. Schools need to have the founding documents being taught in the system, not through the progressive lens that says that they are far-right documents, not through the lens that says we need to only look at the sins of America. No, students need to be able to read in full the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers. They need to engage with them. They need to understand what our founders created and built for us and why it's unique, why it's different, why it has made such a difference in the world, and what it means for their lives. And so this is why local school boards matter. This is something where you might never be able to make change on a statewide level. I hope that's not true, but you might never be able to make change on a statewide level. But you can absolutely make change on your local school board level. You can go to the meetings that they host and speak out against the curriculum that they're teaching. You can run for a seat yourself if you are not satisfied with the work that is being done. But ultimately, you need to advocate for our civics education right where you are, for your child, for the children in your community, because it does not have to come from our governor. It does not have to come from our state leadership. It just has to come right within the school district that your son or daughter, or that your friends, or that your family go to. Second, we need to recognize as a community that symbols matter, because cultures are built and are preserved through repeated and visible acts. And so while it might seem small to have a flag flying, a culture who doesn't display their values inevitably is going to lose them. They're not going to know what their values are. They're going to be taken over by different values or different cultures. And so that is where we need to do the things that reinforce strong community bonds and strong American heritage. That means flying the flag where you can. That means going to the patriotic parades that are put on. It means bringing your kids to the Memorial Day or the July 4th or the Veterans Day celebrations. It means supporting your local veterans organizations. These are not small acts. These are the things that help us to maintain an identity despite a shifting culture beneath us. And so we need to be looking for ways to display these symbols with pride. And lastly, it can always start in your own home, in your own household. Teach your children American history and a love of country. Parents are the first civics teachers. Don't outsource this to whatever education that they are getting. Make it a regular conversation in your home, especially in and around July 4th. Read the Declaration of Independence with them. It will not take long. You will have a great conversation with them, probably a far better conversation that is being had in public schools. What you teach your children to value is going to be the foundation that everything else is built upon. And so we need to be people who are teaching them to value the country that God has placed them in and the very unique and privileged benefits that they get as a result of it, so that they learn to be grateful for what is given to them rather than just standing back and criticizing it with no sort of ownership over it. So my friends, America is turning 250 years we have endured. We have survived a civil war. We've survived 2 world wars, a Great Depression, a Cold War, much political upheaval. We can certainly survive an image problem or this type of decline in patriotism, but we can only survive it if we speak out against it and we work to reclaim it and change the narrative around it. And that being said, California is the largest state in our country. We are the most populous. We are one of the most economically powerful. What California believes about the nation, what California believes about America absolutely matters. And so right now we see that California believes wrongly. It is ruled by a class who does not believe that America is great or worth preserving. But change is going to start with individuals. It's going to start with families. It's going to start with communities. And so we have to be committed to fostering that work. John Adams wrote a letter to his wife Abigail on July 3rd of 1776, just before the Declaration of Independence was signed. He described what he believed this day would come to mean. He said, quote, "I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival, with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward, forevermore." I hope that your July 4th is filled with all of that and more. But more than that, that it's not just a celebration, but it is also a responsibility to preserve what was won for us all of those years ago. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope it was helpful for you as you navigate life in our state, and I genuinely hope you have a wonderful 4th of July celebration. If you love this show, please spread the word and share it with your friends, family, and fellow Californians. And I'll see you back here next week for another episode of the California Conversation.